On December 3, 2021, I submitted the research paper portion of my senior capstone. The topic was focused on the history of tornadoes in Iowa. 217 years of tornadic history are compressed into 16 pages, discussing events ranging from the Grinnell tornado of 1882 to the Jordan tornado of 1976, and what was, at the time, the largest tornado outbreak in the state's history on August 31, 2014. To conclude the paper, I wanted to end on a more poetic note regarding the future. The final sentence of the conclusion reads, "While advancements in technology have reduced the loss of life over time, all it takes is one storm to write a destructive new page in the centuries-old relationship between state and storm." Little did I know that just 12 days later, those words would prove correct in an inconceivable way.
It's moving at more than 100 miles per hour according to the National Weather Service. This storm is racing eastward.
But then we look behind us, and there's no one right behind us.
I was on one road, stuck between two tornadoes.
Just assume all these storms are extremely dangerous, not only from the tornado factor, but straight line winds.
And it just comes rolling at us.
We started seeing power flashes as it went over Grand Junction.
A week after I submitted my paper, I was preoccupied by a nice event ongoing in my part of Iowa. We got out of school an hour early, so I headed home before the sleet and freezing rain really set in. Later that evening, storms brewing far to my south caught my attention, and I watched as the horrific events of December 10th unfolded. Like most others in the meteorological community, I was surprised that such a widespread and violent event happened at this time of year. 2 days later, I was scrolling online, looking at pictures and reading of the destruction, when something caught my eye. I couldn't believe it at first. It was December. Severe weather isn't supposed to happen this far north at that time of year. But as Wednesday drew closer, the more apparent it was that storms would make a visit to Iowa. I was excited. In my calendar, I marked it on with exclamation points in anticipation, only growing when a slight risk was issued by the Storm Prediction Center for most of Iowa on Tuesday. On Wednesday, I awoke earlier than usual. I checked the SPC's convective outlook before going back to sleep. But instead of laying back down, I flew out of bed. What stunned me awake so suddenly was a moderate risk covering most of Iowa, including my county. I was beyond energized, but quickly that feeling turned to a mixture of emotions. Obviously, I was excited to basically be guaranteed a storm to watch, but I began to dread the danger it posed. I was not so concerned with myself. I knew I would be tracking it and that I would warn my family, but instead I was concerned for my community. I knew that people who don't pay much attention to the weather would either think the warnings to be impossible for the time of year, or simply be oblivious to the risk. As I rushed through my morning routine, I brainstormed ways I could better prepare others. These ideas continued as I left for school. As soon as I stepped out of my front door, I noticed the first sign of what was to come. It was way too warm and humid for this time of year. I was not the only person to take note of this quickly. Across the Midwest, those with a knowledge of the weather picked up on these unique conditions. Among them were meteorology majors and storm chasers at Iowa State University in Ames, Iowa.
I remember waking up, seeing the upgrade to a moderate risk. You know, it moved from a slight to a moderate overnight. It's pretty scary. I don't know if you've been to the Caribbean at all, but I've been down to the Caribbean. You wake up in the morning, walk outside, you feel the warm ocean breeze. When I stepped outside my door that morning, that's what I felt. I was just, at that moment, I knew something was going to happen. Like, it was December, and it should not have felt like that.
I woke up, just stepped outside, and it was, I can't remember if it was clear skies or not, but it was warm and muggy. It was very humid as we had been able to warm advect. Plenty of moisture northward. I think at this point we were still in the mid-50s by this point, by the morning hours, just after sunrise, but it was definitely very warm, very muggy, and I had this feeling of, uh-oh.
And as soon as I stepped outside, all of the ground is wet from the dew, and it's like 70 degrees on a December morning. You know, the dew points are in the 60s. You can feel that southerly wind in your face, and it felt like a big severe weather day. And when you've been chasing for a while, you just know that feeling. And that was not something that I've ever experienced in December before. And it was really, really surreal, especially just walking to class in my t-shirt and shorts, about to take a final at the end of fall semester.
You know, it's being sunny and 73 degrees at 10 a.m. in the morning. Like, you know, on a normal summer day, that might not mean much, but everything just leads back to it being December 15th.
I knew the low pressure was still over the Rockies and had just initiated a line of thunderstorms out west by Denver and in Colorado and whatnot. And I remember seeing some of the images that some of my friends who were chasers that posted out there in the morning of that squall blowing through. And it was a very photogenic dust storm squall line right off the bat, because it was just incredibly forced, very fast moving line of convection with very intense winds behind it. So it was kind of already rocking and rolling from the early morning anyways. But it was funny waking up and going, there it is in Colorado. Don't worry, it'll be here in 6 hours. Not nearly 6 hours, but it'll be here fast. And we just spent time looking at models that morning and seeing that we were going to get plenty of moisture advected northward. And we were not dealing with full clear skies, but we were able to warm into the low to mid 70s, which was really kind of scary if you're looking to avoid a large scale wide event like December 15th had. But we were able to warm into the mid 70s, dew points into the low 60s, and that morning it just had this big dreadful feeling of this might get bad.
I kept calling it all year. It was the perfect storm, perfect setup. Everything that needed to happen for it to do what it did happened. Just the winds were strong in the morning, straight out of the south. They were just pumping that moisture up into the Iowa area, which usually we don't get that amount of moisture with no corn on the ground.
That shortwave trough that was that ended up coming through was forecasted like a really long time in advance. So really over a week out, I was watching the models and started seeing this really powerful shortwave start showing up in all the forecasts, and wasn't really thinking about severe weather a whole lot by that point, because it's middle of December, you know. It's not really what you expect. And as it got closer, it started looking like, yeah, that trough's going to come through. There's going to be a lot of wind shear. Moisture is readily available, and it's going to actually make it up to Iowa. And so it started looking like we might even get upper 50s, maybe even into the 60 dew points. And combined with all that shear, it's like, we might actually have like quite a lot of severe weather with this thing.
It was a crazy day leading up to it, something I've never experienced before, and not something I would want to experience again, but it was interesting. That's for sure.
I walked into the school building at the normal time, about 45 minutes before classes began. I found my friends and we sat down for breakfast as usual, but unusually, my mind was racing. I immediately began to explain to my friends of the danger possible that evening. I always talked about the weather, but I think they could tell from my tone that this was different. I didn't get much schoolwork done that day. I was constantly reading and listening to weather reports to get a better grasp on what to expect. During study hall, I began my own warning process. I texted every contact who I knew was in the risk of severe weather, letting them know that they needed to take the weather seriously. I then created a group chat to send severe weather alerts and updates in bulk to classmates and others. By the time the storms were crossing Iowa that evening, anywhere from 30 to 40 people were in the group. School let out early, as is custom on Wednesdays for our district, and I ran home to grab my stuff, then went out to my grandparents' house, north of town. They lived in the country and had a much better view to watch storms. I would have had youth group that night, but because of the concern of the weather, it had been canceled. As a result, I simply had to sit and wait for a few hours for the storms to come to me. However, those in central Iowa would have less time to prepare.
But called into work, they let me off, so I was able to stay out of the dining center and go to the map room, and I watched it as it was rolling across. I believe it started in Kansas. That's where that's where initiation occurred. So I was able to sit in the map room. I guess it was probably about, oh gosh, probably 2 or 3 in the afternoon, maybe 4, when that line initially popped up, and me and all the current meteorology junior class were sitting in the map room. I think there were some seniors there too, and we all sat there and just watched the line form and just watched the system kind of come together. And once it got to, I guess towards the state line of like Iowa, Nebraska, kind of in that area. I think we all took a lunch break, and I ran out and grabbed a bite to eat, and then we came back.
It was a last minute decision because we really didn't have to go all that far. We had that squall line that was coming into the western part of the state, and we had a really nice pool of higher stability sitting just west of Ames. And with the storm, I think the storms are probably moving 80, 90 miles an hour. So anything that we were going to chase was going to be too fast for us to chase, really. So what we had to do was just pick a spot and sit there and see what happened. So it really came down to about an hour before we were watching that squall line come into western Iowa, and I think it was just south of I-80. There was a couple more like mesovortices that were starting to line up on that squall line, and as it moved east, started to bow out more and started to get more circulations embedded in the line, and we decided we were gonna just gun it west and get ahead of that Boeing segment.
I met up with Hunter at his house around 2 o'clock. Storms are already going off over in Nebraska. I mean, this thing started producing severe parameters all the way over in Colorado. So we were keeping an eye on how fast it was moving. 80 miles an hour, 80 to 90 miles an hour. It was crazy. So we're sitting there, we're like, all right, it's in the middle of Nebraska. So if we leave about 4 o'clock and head over, just around the Bruin area, just west of Ames, we should get there right before the storms hit. Which is a crazy concept, because you're thinking, all right, in 2.5 hours from where we're sitting right now, the storms are already going to be moving through central Iowa. I mean, that was, I don't know, like 200 or 300 miles away.
2 p.m. or so, that's kind of when we came up with the plan. I was chasing with Lucas Prokosch, and he came over to my house, and we sat and stared at models for probably a good 2 or 3 hours, looked just live data, just hung out because it was kind of fun to sit there and watch the storm come in. And we just waited until we felt the storm was close enough to go out, because we wanted to give ourselves plenty of time to make decisions, but there isn't a lot of time. Something moving 85 miles an hour at a near northeast vector means it will get to you in 2 hours from Omaha. That's stupid fast. So we just decided that, hey, we're gonna leave at about 4. Now granted, this is December 15th. It's dark by 4:30. Like, you're near the winter solstice, so you have nearly the minimal amount of sunlight possible. So by the time we left, the sun was already going down. And I just remember walking out the door to head out about 4:30, and still had some light, could still see out, but I could see the cloud deck above me. And this is the biggest telltale signs of all tornado outbreaks I've ever chased, is you just look up, and if the cloud deck is ripping above you, it's gonna be a big day. And I just remember looking up, it was in the 60-degree dew points, 70s, I think it was 74 at my house, and just looking up and seeing that sky screaming to the north, and it was just this big, uh-oh. This is gonna get interesting. Here we go. And we head out.
I mean, the sun had already set by the time we actually went out, so we really went straight west out of Ames and went to the Grand Junction area, and it was kind of an indecisive start to the chase, because we were trying to line ourselves up with the best mesovortices, these best signatures that we could see on radar. And if you've ever tried to do that with a squall line, it's very challenging, because they pop up and they might last only a few minutes. And so you kind of got to look for one favorable segment of the line and stick to it. So we tried to pick the best spot, and we were just going kind of back and forth trying to line ourselves up with it. We ended up doing a pretty good job.
It kind of comes from an idea of how you break apart jet streaks and quadrants in jet streaks. Something that you can do with upper level or even lower level charts is when you're looking at jet streaks, you can divide jet streaks into 4 quadrants. You have entrance regions, exit regions, right, left, etc., and whatnot. And the regions you're looking for that increase relative spin in their quadrants versus anticyclonic spin, you want cyclonic spin. You get those in the left, because you put your back into the wind, left exit region, and your right entrance region. Well, with a incredibly powerful, nearly 130 knot, 500 millibar jet, you basically wanted to position yourself where a couple of things. First is that left exit region, because that region generally favors cyclonic rotation, which is favorable to tornadoes. With that as well, the bow, as it moved eastward, started to arc, which means you get a lot better line normal shear on the north side because it aligns perpendicularly with your shear vectors, versus the southern portion, which becomes very hostile to tornadogenesis. So the idea was to pick the line point where you were going to be at the apex of the bow, and northward would be your best favorable region for tornadoes inside of a QLCS squall line event. And as the squall line progressed eastward, it ran into a little bit more cape, 1,000 to 1,500 joules of cape, and as it ran into that, you started to get cellular development on the north side of that apex of the bow, which basically meant a combination of, you now have isolated storms, they don't interact with each other, they're now perfectly parallel to storm relative shear, so the shear is perfectly perpendicular to the boundary they're initiating on, and they're running into more cape. That's a recipe for tornadoes. It doesn't get more simple than that. Now, while it was kind of a, hey stupid, go here, I like to say, there were a lot of factors that just were pretty prime to just pick a location anywhere from basically Highway 80 to Fort Dodge, kind of a northwest to southeast line. From there was the favorable zone to probably find tornadoes, and it was a little bit of just luck. With storms moving 80, 85 miles an hour, it's not like traditional chasing of even traditional squall lines. You just pick a spot, drive at it, sit there, and it hits you, and you just hope it does the thing while you're there. So our position, I felt that we should pick somewhere near Ogden, west of Boone. Felt like that was going to be the best area because I didn't really need to wait for the storm to come to me. I could just drive 30 minutes, sit, and wait for this fast-moving squall line to come hit me.
And so it was dark, and the storm was completely squalled out, coming right at us at 80 miles an hour, if not more. And lots of lightning in the storm, like really surprising. There was just constant lightning shooting across the sky. Really one of the more electric storms that I chased that whole year, and it was in December. You know, we really couldn't see any of the storm until it was almost right on top of us, and we were just sitting out on a dirt road waiting for it to come at us, and we were checking radar, making sure we weren't going to have a tornado go right over top of us, because if it did, we weren't going to be able to move with much warning. We would have had a couple minutes to spare at most if a tornado was coming at us. And we ended up putting ourselves in a pretty good spot to see them, because the storm went over Grand Junction near where we were sitting. So we were a couple miles east of that. We could see the storm going over Grand Junction, and we start seeing the shelf clouds start to come into view. And as that was happening, we were watching for any sort of kinks in the line, any sort of funnels that would indicate tornadoes touching down. And really, we didn't see any of that. There was no like condensation funnels or anything. And so we were like, huh, this is sort of anticlimactic. But there was a bunch of, there's all this lightning shooting around, and then we started seeing power flashes as it went over Grand Junction. And at first we thought it was just straight line winds, taking power lines out or something, but we could see one from north side of the city, and then we see another one from the south side of the city, and then there's a third one that's like bright orange, like lights up the clouds. And so we had all these power flashes going on in different spots, and we're like, what the heck is going on here? And some of them were straight west of us, so whatever was coming at us, we had to just kind of hunker down and hope for the best. So it turned out that those power flashes were actually I think 2 or 3 separate EF2 tornadoes that tracked over that town and actually ended up missing us to the north by a couple miles. And we didn't see any sort of condensation funnel at all. It was just those power flashes, because they only last, well, I mean, they lasted a pretty long time, but they were pretty small tornadoes.
So we left around 4 o'clock, headed for Boone. We ended up moving north of Boone to Pilot Mound, and sun already set by the time we got there. 4:30. Crazy, we already lost the sun, and we just waited.
So it happened fast. The whole chase lasted 45 minutes. And in the span of 45 minutes, I saw 5 tornadoes, all of which were EF2 tornadoes that traveled at least 20 miles. So to preface this, it happened quick. We're driving along, and there's tornado warnings lit up this entire line. And we kind of started waiting for that bow to start forming, and once it did, it was really easy to pick out generally where lots of mesocyclones were forming and how they were being shed. And it was pretty clear. Pick the north side, staged on the apex of this line, the tip of the bow, park there, and just see if you get lucky. That's kind of the idea.
So we, we're watching radar, and we noticed it started to bow as we're getting to Pilot Mound. And obviously this thing's already been producing tornadoes to that point. And we were like, all right, let's find a spot to park. Let's watch.
We ended up a little west of Pilot Mound. We were a little more south. So you go through Pilot Mound and take a left, whatever highway that is. We went down a little bit. There's like a golf course out there. We went a little south of that. Realized that our little area of rotation is probably going to go a little to our north, so we drove 3-4 miles back up the road, a little closer to Pilot Mound. We parked out by, it's like west of Ogden, south of Pilot Mound, somewhere around that area. And we were parked out there and just watched the edge of the cloud base start to come into visual picture.
About 2 miles to our west, we were just watching the lightning, and I noticed within one of the lightning strikes, I noticed a tube on the ground. So Hunter immediately grabbed his camera, started recording and started taking pictures. It was pretty cool. It was pretty far away, so we're like, all right, we're in a safe spot. We should be fine. Watch it for a bit. Saw a couple power flashes from it. That tornado ended up being one of the EF2s, one of the many EF2s.
You probably weren't going to get fully condensed tornadoes, so we didn't expect to see that. What we were looking to see is probably dust whirls, because in 2021, in December, I was still in a drought, lots of dusty fields. We had just finished the harvest a couple months prior, so there's still plenty of dust laying around. So you're hoping that with this strong winds in either the straight line winds, which were behind the storm, or the tornadoes themselves, they'd be able to pick up a lot of dust and make them easier to see at dark with lightning. And that was the case with the first tornado. Watched it come north of Dana. It wasn't anything special, but it was just this, you had the base and you had this darker, dusty tube reaching to the cloud base about 10 miles away. but it was very clear, frequent and lots of lightning flashes, and honestly, I didn't realize I captured on camera until we were watching then power flashes go off as the tornado was running through a farmstead, which I didn't know it was a farmstead at the time, but watched that column go over an area, watched 3 or 4 power flashes, boom, 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 and then you know that that obviously was a tornado because it was ahead of the straight line winds behind the line. So you knew that that was likely a tornado, so I marked that point, which we would go check later, see for damage, because obviously it blew power lines, so there's clearly damage over there. So we'll go take a look at that. The next one, I don't actually see this tornado, but I catch power flashes of it. And I'm a believer that if you're gonna, as a chaser, that if you're gonna count a tornado, you need to have physical evidence that it existed. So either you have video, photo, whatnot. You have to have captured it some way. Because you can sometimes see things, but if the camera doesn't see it, did you really see it? So with this tornado, I didn't capture it on camera, but I did catch a power flash of it, but it didn't illuminate the whole column. And I didn't actually know that was a tornado until I saw the damage survey by the NWS later. So we waited for the storm to get a little closer, and then I was like, you wanna know what? No, we're not done yet. I'm not submitting this, we can get more. And so I idiotically think I can keep up with an 85-mile-an-hour moving storm. There is no speed limit in Iowa that allows you to go faster than that. And even if you did, you still don't keep up with it.
And we were like, oh, let's, it's moving pretty fast. Maybe we could try to, catch up with it and maybe get a couple more pictures. So we started moving north, try to get in front of it again. And we look out to as we're watching, we look out our left window to the west and we notice something in front of us.
I'm driving up the road, it's dark, just flashes of lightning, and then I get one flash, one CG pulled out of my left. It just illuminates everything out to my left. Really nice, purple, illuminated everything, and something catches my eye on the left. And I'm like, what the heck was that? So I slow down, pull over, just off the road, and Lucas is like screaming like, what are we doing? We gotta go. And I'm like, hold on, I saw something.
And there was a debris ball on the ground, a dust ball on the ground, right in front of us. So we start freaking out. We're like, oh my God, this is like 50 meters from us, and we're driving right to it.
We get another flash of lightning, and there's a tornado 50 yards away from us in the field. Just this nice little cone, not fully condensed, but nice cone, and this big old dust swirl 50 yards away in this field next to us, and we're all like, oh shoot, oh, okay, well, I guess we're waiting. And I whip out my camera, I take a photo of it with another flash. I get a beautifully clear photo of this tornado as it starts to rocket up to the northeast at 85 miles an hour. And I'm sitting there out the window, I'm shooting it, I'm like, this is awesome, I'm just taking as many photos as I can with the flashes of lightning, and I get another flashlight and something catches my eye behind me.
But then we look behind us and there's another one right behind us.
And I get another flashlight and there's another tornado on the ground about a quarter of a mile back down the road where we were. And it has a larger debris cloud, but very clear, like there's no one behind us. And I realized like, well, we're kind of stuck because you don't drive forward because that's right there. And with these tornadoes moving at 80, like why these were so dangerous, they were very weak tornadoes on themselves. If this was a normal day, these would barely be classified as an EF0. Like very weak, probably only had 50 or 60 miles per hour inside of the actual funnel, nothing crazy at all. But what makes them dangerous is the fact that they were moving forward at 85 miles an hour. Physics gets weird with tornadoes because there's a lot of things you have to count into why tornadoes do the damage they do, and the reason for that is you have rotational wind inside, you have forward speed, and if there's any vorticity or vortices inside of the main parent tornado, you have to add those wind speeds as well, along with how fast they're moving inside of the tornado. So you get all these multiplication factors where, yeah, a tornado's only 45 miles an hour on the inside, barely enough to be called a dust devil. Well, that tornado is if you added up forward speed of 85 miles an hour, 45, well, that's 120 miles per hour. Congratulations, that's an EF2 tornado and a strong one. And those are the ones that rip off roofs of nearly every building. Just cleanly take off roofs. So yeah, that little dust swirl will rip roofs off like it's nothing. So You don't drive into those. You avoid them as best as possible. But here I am watching this guy just whirl along. And fortunately, they're moving 85 miles an hour. It's not going to deviate. You know, it's just going to slingshot past you. So kind of got in this rare situation where I was on one road, stuck between two tornadoes as they both moved northeastward at 85 miles an hour. And we were freaking out.
So we have no idea what to really do. So Hunter's just, I'm just going to drive and hope for the best. We ended up making a turn on some road as we tried to thread the needle between the two. And I don't know how we saw the turn.
We wait 30 seconds. I get dash video of the tornado, the first one moving in front of us, on my GoPro that was mounted to my dash cam, or the front of my dash. And let that one go by, and then the second one goes over the golf course, does some damage to a farmstead, continues off and goes off. Well, we're still in a little bit of a sketchy situation because the tornado started going off, but I had to my exit route was go up to this intersection and take a right, but I had to wait for the first tornado to go by so I can go forward. But the problem is that when I take a right, I'm now at a direct vector of this next tornado going across, so I have to also wait for that one to go by. And that led to some tense moments where the second tornado actually throws a tree at us, and we dodge it within feet. And there's video of Lucas going, "Tree!" and I'm like, "Shoot!" "Tree! Tree!" And I dodge a tree on the road. And yeah, that was funny. Let the tornado go off, goes over Twister Hill, and we go up the hill to escape, trying to stay ahead of the line. Completely futile. We ended up hitting one of the thinnest parts of the entire line, so it was literally over in 2 minutes. We didn't experience any crazy straight line wind. It was just rain. It was maybe 30, 40 mile an hour wind. It was just the weakest little part of the line, but it was producing tornadoes. So we avoided some of the 70, 75 mile per hour wind that was associated with the edge of the line, but that didn't save you from the 60, 65, 70 mile an hour wind, which was the rear inflow jet behind the storm. And that was nuts. That was wild. I had never been in a situation where behind a technically cold front associated with a line of thunderstorms, I've never had a rear inflow jet be that nuts. We were talking, first off, dust being picked up, you could see from satellite, from Kansas and eastern Colorado, get carried, and you're just in a full dust storm, just a very finely gridded dust storm in Iowa. And it was one of those weird nights. You're like, this is just a surreal day that I'm in.
State line, and we were thinking about it, okay, well, there's got to be a good place on campus to go and watch this storm. Admittedly, probably not the smartest move. We probably should have been trying to get to a place where we, would be safe. But in our minds at the time, we were like, let's go find a spot where we can watch this roll in. So we go to the research building. We climb to the top floor of the research building, and we find this big window that faces west. And we're sitting there and we're watching it. It was really cool because it got dark on us, and then all of a sudden, way off on the horizon, we could see lightning flashes start to pop a little bit. And that was about an hour before the storm hit, so it was probably about 90 miles away at that point. But for the next hour, we were able to watch those lightning flashes get closer and closer and get brighter and brighter and brighter. And finally, we could see the base of the cloud. And one of my buddies, Sam, had a time lapse going, and we didn't realize it until the next day. But as it was rolling in, you could look off to the west and you could see two lowerings from the base of the storm. And we realized later that that was twin tornadoes that touched down in and around Boone. And there were a couple of other meteorology majors. I think you're interviewing both of them, Luke and Hunter, that were out there. And those were the same twin tornadoes that they had a close encounter with. So we were sitting there, we watched it, and we watched the storm roll in. As it got closer, we got down from the 6th floor. Again, poor choice here. We decided to walk out and feel it when the storm hit. And one thing I'll never forget about that day is how strong the winds were before the storm hit. And also how warm it was. I remember walking out 9 a.m. that day, and I'm in Ames, Iowa on December 15th, and it feels like I'm standing in Atlanta, Georgia, where I'm from, on, the morning of July 4th. It was humid, it was hot, I was sweating walking across campus, 70 degrees, close to 50, 60 degree dew points, I'm guessing at that point. And the wind that day was 40 miles an hour out of the south. And that night when we stepped out, it was still just a constant 40 mile an hour wind hitting us in the face. And I know Iowa gets windy, but that was I think it's just because we knew what was coming storm-wise. It was eerie almost. Like we step out, we know that there's wind coming up from the south, and we know it's not from the storms. We're like, okay, well, we've got a 40-mile-an-hour wind beating on us right now, and we're standing out in this parking lot, kind of fast-forwarding to where we're now, outside waiting on the storm to hit us that night. And we're out there, and the wind's hitting us, and we're thinking, okay, this is really cool. And we're looking at the radar, and we can see that gust front, and it gets to us, and we're sitting there out in the parking lot, and we're like, okay, well, the wind should be changing right about now. And we get a little bit of a gust from the west, and it was probably about a 40, 50 mile an hour gust, which is certainly nothing to be, nothing to downplay. But we're standing there and we're like, okay, well, this storm's moving 90 miles an hour. We've got to be getting at least 90 mile an hour wind with this at some point or another. And we're standing out there, we're still waiting on the storm to hit, and all of a sudden we just see this wall of like cloud and leaf and dust. It's picking up everything that it possibly can off that asphalt parking lot, and it just comes rolling at us. And we all are like, there it is. And our knee-jerk reaction was just to scream and run. And we all turned and ran inside. And that, like I said, that was the 90 mile an hour wind gust, and that hit us hard. And we got inside. At that point, we were away from all the big windows, so that was probably the smartest decision that we made throughout the entirety of our experience with it. But we ran inside. We watched the initial wind hit us. Fortunately, there wasn't any serious damage on campus that I saw. It wasn't anything like the Derecho from 2020, but it was an amazing experience. And then once it was all said and done, we got that initial gust front out of the way, and we got into the rain shield that was behind that leading line. And then that was when me and my buddy decided, hey, let's go stand in it. So we go out, and the temperature drop was incredible too. We went from close to 70 degrees, I want to say it was, out in front of the storm, to upper 40s, lower 50s. And he and I ran outside, immediately got soaked because it was just pouring. And there was still a pretty good wind with it. We got soaked. And we had not brought a change of clothes. We didn't bring a jacket or anything. So we also had to walk home at that point. So we had a cold, wet walk home in rain, like 45 degrees, shorts and a t-shirt. That was a rough ending, but honestly, I laugh thinking back on it, and I'm kind of glad we did it because it was just one of those little things. It's like, you just kind of laugh when you think about it.
As the Derecho continued eastward, it reached its maximum forward speed of an astonishing 110 miles per hour. I tracked it from northern Fayette County, waiting for it to get close enough to see lightning. All the while, I was updating the group chat I had created to make sure they knew what was coming. Finally, just past 7 o'clock, I headed outside to watch the storm roll in. I drove my grandpa's mule to the top of the hill in their driveway. Already lightning was flickering on the horizon. The feeling that night was bizarre and eerie. Here I was, after dark, in the middle of December, standing on a hill in a light sweatshirt, in jeans, watching the horizon ablaze with electricity. The prospect of watching such a strong storm system this late in the year was unsettling enough, but the winds ahead of it were constantly blowing. The gusts would create an ominous whistle in the power lines overhead. This is one of the many times I wish that I had cameras that would pick up lightning better, but the frequency of the lightning alone is enough to demonstrate the power behind it. The strongest part of the storm cruised on past to the northeast, sparing my area from the tornado risk. As I observed the lightning, that intense section of the storm continued to put down tornadoes near Cresco and into southern Minnesota. Eventually, it came time to retreat to safety. I hopped in the mule and backed down the driveway to the house. However, I wasn't quite done watching it. I ran back out of the garage and tried my best to get a few pictures from by the shed. Once I felt it was time to go back inside, I went through the house and out onto the rear deck. It had a roof and faced east, but I was able to look around the side of the house to the west. I continued to watch from here until the wind and the rain came in. From then on, I waited out the storm and eventually went home once the worst had passed. It had already been apparent that this event would be historic by the time it began its race across the plains. However, the sheer scale of the event was staggering. In only 8 hours, the Derecho traveled from Kansas and Nebraska to Wisconsin. It was the first Derecho to ever occur in the United States in the month of December. In total, it produced 120 tornadoes. This incredible statistic places it fourth of the largest tornado outbreaks in a 24-hour time period. 63 of these tornadoes touched down in Iowa, setting the record of the largest outbreak in the state's history and the most EF2 or stronger tornadoes in a single event. Previously, Iowa had only recorded 5 tornadoes in December. Likewise, Wisconsin had also only recorded 5 tornadoes in December prior to 2021. But on the 15th, they saw 10. Minnesota had never seen a tornado in the month of December, and they recorded 22. The severe wind gusts recorded were significant as well. A wind gust of 100 miles per hour was recorded at Russell Municipal Airport in Kansas, and is the strongest official wind gust produced by the Derecho. But earlier that morning in Colorado, as the system began to move out of the Rockies, a gust of 107 miles per hour was recorded at Lamar Airport. It is the highest official wind speed measurement from the event. However, the Derecho was not the only risk factor in this weather system. The high winds continued in the wake of the Derecho, often gusting well within severe parameters. Non-thunderstorm wind gusts reached over 100 miles per hour in Colorado, as previously mentioned. Wind gusts up to 97 miles per hour were recorded in Smith Center, Nebraska, and continued to breach 80 miles per hour into Iowa after the storms passed. This wind brought many more risks. Blowing dust became a problem across the entirety of the plains. The fire danger also increased dramatically in Kansas as dry conditions and the intense wind fanned flames for thousands of acres.
Went back to track the first EF2 we saw. Wanted to go see what it hit, and we pulled up to a farmstead that got a direct hit from. It was tough to see it because I lived in Hugo back in 2008. I lived in the neighborhood that got hit by it. That sparked my interest in weather and everything. I probably wouldn't be here if it wasn't for that. But now it's, every time I see like places getting hit on a chase, it really hits me. It's a really big reminder that these storms are beautiful, tornadoes are amazing, but they can do a lot of damage. And luckily, everyone that we saw was okay. Every little farmstead we stopped at, everyone was okay. There were a couple cats that were a little scared. One had to crawl into our car because it was just in shock, and when it moved underneath Hunter's tire when we tried to leave. As we were standing at the farmstead and there was sheet metal up in the trees, it took about a half hour after the storms passed for those wind gusts behind it to hit. And as soon as they hit, we were basically running around telling everyone to, stay away from the trees, stay away from anything hanging above you. These winds are not fun. The temperature probably dropped about 20 degrees within a half hour or two. It was nuts.
So we're like, all right, we'll go back there, see what we find. And as we kind of mazed around, we start seeing police lights off in the distance. We're like, all right, well, that's clearly where we need to go. And we come along and we get past where officers were just clearing a road with a tow truck because several trees had collapsed onto this road and had blocked the way. So we were one of the first people to get through. And we get through, and as we get into a clearing, we see a farmstead that's just out in the open, away from all the groves and trees, and it is flattened. The only thing left standing was the farmstead home, and that's because I think it was just frankly missed, which was funny because it was sitting just in the middle of the damage path of this whole farmstead, but it was totally fine, but everything else was shredded around this building. And we pull up because the first thing we see is a barn that's completely destroyed. A couple out structures wiped away, and another farm building which had severe damage to the roof and walls. Clearly strong EF2 damage, which can be surprisingly vicious. So we pull up and we run up to the house, fortunately find other people there. Fortunately, the people were actually totally okay by a miracle because they were actually out working in the yard, just stowing away loose objects while not preparing for the strong winds to come. And they got the tornado warning on their phone. And fortunately had like 20-30 minutes to react to this, which was great. And they said that they were working in the shed and the yard, just picking up stuff, putting it in, securing it. And at one point they thought, we can just stay in the shed here and just watch it from here. And which was a cinder block shed building, maybe as big as this room, 5 feet by 10 feet, nothing too crazy, but cinder block cemented structure. And after about sitting there watching the storm for about 10 or 15 minutes, they then just decided, we'll just go back to the house. and we'll just hunker down there. Yeah, we're gonna get wet, but whatever, you know, we'll just go back to the house. And that shed was completely wiped away. There was nothing left standing in that shed. The only thing left, I think, was the lawnmower, and that's because the walls fell on it. Literally, that whole shed was gone. And talking to the man, he firmly believes that if he was in that building, they probably would have died. So it was kind of a miracle that last minute he just decided, nah, it's okay, we'll get wet, we'll go back to the house and be safe there. And that saved their lives that night. We found helped them search for a couple of their farm animals. There was a poor thing, this cat, barn cat that we found, had apparently rid out the tornado in that shed. Totally okay, but very shaken up, and when the backside rear inflow jet came through, there was a lot of sheet metal in the trees that were still left standing, and it was just a very creaky, eerie metal sound against wood, damage, just the sound of a damaged field in strong wind. And it was a little sketchy because you don't know if that wind's going to take that debris back down on you. So we realized, like, all right, well, hope you found what you needed to find now, because you can't be out here now anymore, because that wind could take the debris out of the trees, and that would kill you. It's because it's sharp, twisted, ripped off sheet metal. You don't want to be outside when that goes flying around.
In total, $1.9 billion in damage were recorded in the aftermath. Countless farms and towns across the interior of the United States would have to recover from this sudden blow. The system, unfortunately, directly resulted in the deaths of 5 people, with 2 more indirect fatalities occurring as well. Over 600,000 people were left without power. However, there was one stroke of good fortune that lessened the impact.
Now, even though Ames was relatively spared, it was close. It was scary close. If that tip of the bow was a little further south, just one county south, Ames would have been carpet bombed by tornadoes, at least 3 of them. And all of them are EF2. So can you imagine north, central, and southern Ames being carpet bombed by 3 long track tornadoes that cover the entire part of Ames? That's what would have happened, because that's what just happened. It's 20 miles to the northwest. But because where the tip of the bow was, the tornado stayed away from Ames. And most of the tornadoes actually generally avoided things, because a lot of northwest central Iowa is fairly sparse, not unpopulated, but sparse. It's just farmland with small farming communities. And so these tornadoes could just carve through open fields because now harvest is done. So there was hardly any damage that really happened from it. Like the December 15th, 2021 serial derecho would have likely been near on par with the 2020 derecho if crops were in the field. Because not only would you have had significant wind of gusts of 80 plus miles per hour going through, you have also had tornadoes, which would have devastated any crops that were there, period, let alone any other damages that it ran across. So we were very, very lucky to have it when it was, but also to have such a historic outbreak in December has never been recorded before.
Most lingering damage today in the area around where Hunter, Lucas, and Mark chased is mainly found in the trees. Farms and structures that were hit cleared the debris away and/or rebuilt in the years since then. Another possible factor in the limited damage was the width of the tornadoes. The tornadoes were moving at incredible speeds, but the largest were only about 100 yards wide. This combination meant that the tornadoes would only have a few seconds to inflict their damage.
Continues off and goes off. Well, it gets even crazier. I didn't know this at the time, because if you're familiar with the movie Twister, you know most of the scenes were filmed in Iowa. Contrary to common belief, but most of the scenes were actually filmed in Iowa, not Oklahoma. So that's cool. Well, there's a scene in the movie Twister where Bill and Joe are driving their truck up the hill to a tornado that frequently drops, comes back, and a boat flies by. That scene is called Twister Hill. That location is west of Boone, Iowa, which was one of the areas where I was right next to when the twin tornadoes went by, and found out later that I had watched not only twin tornadoes from a historic derecho, but one of them ran over Twister Hill. So I can legitimately claim I saw a tornado at the Twister site. And I think that's cool. And yeah, and you have too. NWS, like if you look up the tornado tracks and find where Twister Hill is, just west of Bruin, you'll see it goes right over top of it. Just screams over it for 20 miles, just passes by it in a blink, but it was there, and I saw it, and that's really cool. So I've considered that I have peaked in life, and it's not getting any better than this, and it's all downhill from here.
I didn't have much experience with derechos going into this. I'm a meteorology major, but I just hadn't really heard much about them. My first experience with one was the August 2020 derecho that rolled through here, and we had like acres and acres of cornfields that got flattened because the wind was so hard. So that was kind of what I was comparing it to. And for this one, I was expecting a kind of a repeat of that because the way that people were talking about it. So I was expecting like hurricane, Cat 2, Cat 3 hurricane force winds, and I was expecting, trees down everywhere. So I guess as soon as the storm was over, my experience or my take on it was almost underwhelmed a little bit, just because I didn't realize how many tornadoes had been dropped. I didn't realize what was going on around the rest of the state. All I had to compare to was just what happened on campus with what happened in August of the previous year. So it was, walking around the next day, I don't even think I realized how many tornadoes there were until several weeks later, when I heard it mentioned that, yeah, we set a record for most tornadoes in December, I believe in the U.S. and in Iowa in one day. So that, I guess it was kind of a delayed response or a delayed reaction for me to realize the magnitude of what that storm was.
The fact that you were able to break the most tornadoes in a single event, as well as the most significant tornadoes in a single event in December, is mind-boggling. That has never happened before. It was the only time a moderate risk has been issued that far north in December. It was also a PDS watch that was issued that was one of the most absurdly large watches, and I'm so glad they issued it because it was needed. But it just was one of the most historic things to happen in severe weather in the Midwest in a long time. Unfortunately, there was a historic nuts derecho just a year prior, but this event was by far one of the craziest things that probably happened in the Midwest in a long time, if it wasn't for the 2020 derecho. So, the 2021 derecho was wild, to say the least.
For me, the December 15th derecho was likely my first major stepping stone to the position where I am now. With the creation of the Severe Weather Alerts group chat and spreading the word as far as I could, I really began to realize the potential I had and the impact I could make in raising awareness about severe weather in the community. This, along with a few more events in the following months, truly set me on the path to begin storm chasing and to push me to start exploring the weather community. But that is a story for another time. The legacy left behind by the December 15th, 2021 derecho varies from person to person, but there is no doubt of its significance. This event was one of the most dramatic and intense events in recorded history. The system's varied impacts and massive scale would have stood out at any time, but the date just adds to the legend. 1 year on, the storms of December 15th still linger in the minds of those who experienced it, and will likely continue to do so for years to come. For those who chased, tracked, or simply survived, there will be no forgetting the derecho of December 15th, 2021.
You got video, right?
I'm recording.
Oh, wait, right in front of us.
Oh yeah, right there.
Debris cloud.
Yep. No, it's moving across the road right now.
Oh, yep, there's the tower. I see it. Debris cloud right in front of us.
Yeah, it's right on top of us.
We're getting rocked with RFD and outer circulation.
Yep. Hail 2.
Okay, so unfortunately this tornado is on our road.
Oh, big ass hail.
Watch to our right. It should be to our right.
I can't see anything.
This will get a lot better when we make our right turn. There should be 2 tornadoes on the ground, one in front of us and one to our right.
land.